The rain on Virex 11 never stopped. It pattered against the protective dome of the landing platform with a constant hiss, droplets sliding down in rivulets that caught the crimson light of the distant sun. Elena Reyes stood at the edge of the platform, her dark eyes focused on the landscape beyond. Acid rain, constant, unrelenting, and deadly. The briefing had been clear about that much. "Cadets, attention!" The voice of the drone instructor cut through the nervous murmurs of the assembled group. "Welcome to your survival assessment on Virex 11. Elena straightened her back, but didn't turn away from the view. 24 hours until the dual storm system hit. 24 hours to prepare. She counted the alien cadets around her. 3 Xenorians with their translucent skin, a pair of hulking Vargans, a single Mentarian with its multiple eye stalks, and 4 Quals whose feathered limbs twitched nervously. 10 aliens. And her, the lone human representative from Earth. The drone hovered closer, its metallic voice reverberating across the platform. Virex 11 experiences continuous acidic precipitation, with cyclonic storm systems every 48 hours. Your task is simple: survive the next storm cycle without the aid of technology. A collective gasp rippled through the group. The Xenorian's skin pulsed with alarm, shifting from pale blue to a distressed purple. One of the Vargans stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the drone. "Without technology? This is absurd. We are engineers, scientists, pilots, not primitives," he growled, baring teeth that could crush bone. The drone remained impassive. "The Intergalactic Academy values adaptability above all. You have been chosen as representatives of your worlds because of your potential. Now prove it." Elena finally turned away from the acidic landscape, her mind already cataloging the resources visible beyond the dome. Unlike her alien counterparts, she had grown up camping in the reclaimed wilderness zones of Earth. Her grandfather had been obsessive about teaching the old ways, skills most humans considered quaint and unnecessary in an age of atmospheric stabilizers and instant shelters. You have 12 hours to construct basic shelter before the protective dome is retracted. No tools will be provided. No technological assistance will be permitted. Survival resources must be gathered from the environment. The drone's camera eye swiveled, focusing on each cadet in turn. Those who fail to adapt will fail the assessment. The platform erupted into arguments. The Quals fluttered their feathers in agitation, high-pitched voices overlapping as they debated the merits of various synthetic materials they no longer had access to. The Mentarian's eye stalks twisted in different directions, likely calculating survival probabilities. The Vargans pounded their fists against the platform, demanding reconsideration. Only Elena remained silent, her gaze returning to the landscape. Twisted rock formations, vegetation that appeared fibrous and resilient, pools of collected rainwater that hadn't dissolved the surrounding stone, suggesting varying levels of acidity. There was something to work with here. There always was. The assessment begins now. The dome will retract in exactly 12 hours. With that final announcement, the drone retreated to a monitoring station at the center of the platform. Elena didn't waste time with complaints. She approached the edge of the dome, where a small airlock permitted exit to the planet's surface. The taller of the Vargans blocked her path. "Where are you going, human? To die more quickly?" His voice was thick with disdain. Elena looked up at him calmly. "To gather materials while everyone else argues about the unfairness of it all." The Vargan's laugh was like stones grinding together. "Your species always thinks it knows better. What could a human possibly teach the rest of us about survival?" "Nothing," Elena replied with a slight shrug. "I'm not here to teach. I'm here to survive." She stepped around him and through the airlock, adjusting the protective coveralls that were the only technology they'd been permitted to keep. The suit would shield her from the acid rain for approximately 6 hours before degrading. Another fact from the briefing. 6 hours to gather what she needed. 6 hours to begin construction. The moment Elena stepped onto the surface of Virex 11, the rain hit her protective hood with a steady patter. Through the transparent material, she could see the others still on the platform, gesturing wildly in continued debate. She turned away from them and began her survey of the immediate area. The ground beneath her boots was composed of a porous volcanic rock, slick with moisture but stable enough to walk on. She knelt down, examining the texture. Volcanic formations often meant caves, potential natural shelter. But the briefing had warned of seismic instability. No, a cave would be too risky. Elena moved methodically across the landscape, testing materials as she encountered them. She pulled at the fibrous vegetation growing in clusters between rock formations. It resisted at first, then tore free with a sound like ripping cloth. Strong, flexible. The acid rain seemed to roll off its surface rather than eat through it. She gathered armfuls, tying them into bundles with strips torn from the same plants. Next came the discovery of flat, slate-like stones scattered throughout the area. Elena stacked several, testing their weight and durability. They split cleanly along natural fault lines when struck against harder rocks, perfect for creating overlapping layers. The third material was the most surprising, a spongy, foam-like substance growing in the shadows of larger rock formations. When Elena pressed it between her fingers, it compressed, then slowly expanded back to its original shape. It was dry despite the constant rain, suggesting water resistance. She harvested as much as she could carry. By the time Elena returned to the dome, 3 hours had passed, and her arms were laden with materials. The aliens had finally stopped arguing and had ventured out in small groups, but their approach seemed haphazard. The Xenorians were attempting to weave some kind of shelter from thin, fragile fronds that dissolved in their hands. The Qualls had gathered piles of colorful stones that might have been aesthetically pleasing, but offered no practical protection. The Vargans had simply collected the largest boulders they could carry, apparently planning to stack them. Only the Mentirian showed any methodical approach, its eye stalks working independently to examine different aspects of the environment. It had gathered some of the same fibrous plants Elena had collected, though in smaller quantities. Elena found a corner of the platform to begin her work. First, she laid out her materials, organizing them by type and quality. Then, she began testing different configurations, binding the fibrous plants together to create a framework. She worked silently, ignoring the occasional glances from the other cadets. One of the Xenorians approached, its translucent body now a curious shade of green. "What are you constructing, human?" it asked, voice melodic and fluid. "A triangular shelter," Elena replied, without looking up from her work. "Strongest shape against wind pressure. The fibers will form the frame. The spongy material provides insulation and acid resistance, and the stone slabs create the outer layer." The Xenorian's body rippled with what might have been amusement. "So primitive. On my world, we would simply activate a molecular shield." "But we don't have molecular shields," Elena pointed out, continuing to bind the fibers together. "We have these plants, these rocks, and our minds." "A mind is wasted on such basic tasks," the Xenorian replied. "This exercise is beneath beings of our advancement." Elena finally looked up. "Nothing that keeps you alive is beneath you." The Xenorian drifted away, clearly unconvinced. Elena returned to her work, meticulously creating a triangular frame that would withstand the coming storm. The hours passed quickly as she bound, tested, and refined her design. Across the platform, frustration mounted among the other cadets. The Vargans had created a crude circle of boulders, but with no binding material. The stones shifted constantly. The Qualls had abandoned their colorful rocks and were now attempting to dig into the platform itself, their clawed hands scraping uselessly against the metallic surface. The Xenorians had given up on construction entirely and were engaged in what appeared to be a meditation circle. their bodies pulsing with synchronous light patterns. Only the Mentirian showed progress. Having created a small, dome-like structure from interwoven plants, it wasn't sturdy enough to withstand a strong wind, but it showed understanding of basic principles. 6 hours into the assessment, Elena had completed the frame of her shelter and begun applying the spongy insulation to the interior. She worked methodically, pressing the material into the gaps between the fiber framework. The design was taking shape, a low, triangular hut with a narrow entrance that could be sealed from within. "Attention, cadets," the drone announced suddenly. "You have 6 hours remaining before the protective dome is retracted. Current meteorological data indicates the first storm system will arrive approximately 4 hours after dome retraction." The announcement sent a new wave of panic through the group. The Vargans abandoned their boulder circle and approached Elena's corner of the platform, looming over her work. "Human," the taller one rumbled, "you appear to have a functional design." Elena continued working without acknowledging them. She knew what was coming. "We propose a trade," the second Vargan said. "Share your shelter design, and we will offer protection during the assessment. Our physical strength would be an asset." "There's no trade necessary," Elena replied, carefully fitting stone slabs over the insulation layer. "I've been working in plain sight. You're welcome to observe and learn." The Vargans exchanged looks. "We don't learn from lesser species. We are offering an alliance." "No," Elena said simply. "This shelter will barely fit one person. I've designed it for my dimensions, not yours. You have 6 hours. Build your own." The taller Vargan's expression darkened. "You refuse our generous offer?" "I'm declining an offer that doesn't make sense," Elena corrected. "You still have time to create something functional if you start now." The Vargans retreated, muttering between themselves. Elena knew she had made enemies, but alliances formed from desperation rarely lasted. Better to be honest from the start. As the final hours ticked away, Elena completed the outer layer of her shelter, carefully overlapping the slate-like stones to create a waterproof shell. She tested the entrance flap, a tight-fitting door made from bound fibers and insulation that could be sealed from inside. The structure was small, just large enough for her to lie down or sit upright, but it was solid, waterproof, and acid-resistant. With 1 hour remaining, Elena gathered additional materials to reinforce the structure and create a small drainage system around the perimeter. She noticed the Mentirian watching her work, its eye stalks focused intently on her hands. "Your design incorporates principles of fluid dynamics," it observed, voice a series of clicks and whistles translated by their basic communication devices. "The angled sides will channel the acidic precipitation away from the entrance." Elena nodded. "And the drainage trench will prevent pooling around the base." "Efficient," the Mentirian acknowledged. "I have attempted similar principles, though my execution lacks refinement." Elena glanced at the Mentirian's shelter, a dome-like structure that had improved over the past hours. "Your design has advantages too. The rounded top will distribute wind pressure more evenly." The Mentirian's eye stalks quivered in what might have been appreciation. "I am called Kor." "Elena Reyes." They didn't speak further, but a silent understanding passed between them, recognition of shared methodology, if not shared design. "Cadets, final warning," the drone announced. "The protective dome will retract in 15 minutes. Proceed to your shelters and prepare for exposure to planetary conditions." The platform erupted into frantic activity. The Xenorians abandoned their meditation and rushed to gather materials, far too late to create anything substantial. The Qualls huddled together, their feathers puffed in distress. The Vargans had managed to create a crude lean-to from boulders and plant fibers, though it lacked any waterproofing or insulation. Elena made final adjustments to her shelter, securing loose stones and reinforcing the entrance flap. She caught a glimpse of one of the Vargans watching her with narrow eyes, his massive hands clenched into fists. She would need to be vigilant. "Dome retraction commencing," the drone announced. With a mechanical hum, the protective barrier began to recede. Immediately, the acid rain fell upon the platform, sizzling slightly where it hit metal surfaces. The cadets scrambled for whatever protection they had managed to construct. Elena crawled into her shelter, pulling the entrance flap closed behind her. Inside, it was dark but dry. She could hear the patter of rain against the stone outer layer, but not a drop penetrated. The spongy insulation kept the temperature surprisingly comfortable despite the chill outside. Through the small gaps in her shelter, Elena watched the chaos unfold. The Xenorians huddled beneath a hastily constructed lean-to that was already beginning to dissolve under the acidic assault. The qualls had crammed themselves into a shallow indent in the platform, their feathers already showing signs of damage. The Vargan's shelter was holding for now, but the lack of proper binding meant it would likely collapse in stronger winds. Only Kor, the Mentirian, had created something that might withstand the initial rainfall, though Elena doubted it would survive the coming storm. Hours passed. The acid rain continued relentlessly, occasionally strengthening into downpours that tested the integrity of every shelter. Elena used the time to rest, conserving her energy for the challenges ahead. She had brought a small amount of the spongy material inside, and she now used it to collect rainwater that ran down the sides of her shelter, squeezing the liquid into her mouth. It was slightly bitter, but drinkable. Another piece of information from the briefing that many of the aliens had likely ignored. As night fell on Virex 11, the first hints of the storm arrived. Wind began to gust, sending sheets of acid rain in horizontal blasts against the shelters. Elena heard the first structure collapse, the Xenorians' lean-to giving way with a wet slap as the materials hit the platform. Their cries were quickly muffled, suggesting they had found some other form of protection, at least temporarily. The true test came near midnight. The storm hit with full force, winds howling across the platform with such intensity that Elena's entire shelter trembled. She braced herself against the interior frame, adding her body weight to the structure's integrity. The sound was deafening, rain lashing against stone, wind screaming through the rock formations beyond the platform, and the occasional crash as another cadet's shelter succumbed to the elements. Through it all, Elena's triangular hut held firm. The design distributed the wind pressure efficiently, while the overlapping stone slabs prevented any rain from penetrating. The drainage system channeled the water away from the base, preventing erosion of the platform beneath her shelter. In the darkest hour of the night, when the storm was at its peak, Elena heard something else, a scratching at her entrance flap. She tensed, immediately alert. The Vargans? Had they come to force their way into her shelter? "Please," came a weak voice, barely audible above the storm. Not a Vargan's rumbling tones, but the clicking, whistling language of the Mentirian. "My shelter has failed. The acid—" Elena hesitated. The assessment rules were clear. Individual survival was the goal. Sharing resources was not prohibited, but her shelter was designed for one. Opening the entrance now would compromise its integrity, allowing wind and rain to damage the interior. The scratching came again, more feeble this time. "I understand if you refuse," Kor's voice translated. "It is the logical choice." Elena closed her eyes briefly. Logic wasn't everything. She reached for the entrance flap and loosened the bindings. "Come in quickly," she said, pulling the flap aside just enough to create an opening. Kor squeezed through the gap, his elongated body dripping with acidic water. Several of his eye stalks were damaged, the sensitive tissues blistered from exposure. Elena quickly sealed the entrance behind him, then used some of the spare spongy material to absorb the liquid he had brought in. "Thank you." Kor's voice was weak, his translation device damaged and functioning only intermittently. "My calculations were flawed." The wind vectors. Save your strength, Elena instructed, pressing more of the absorbent material against his injured eye stalks. The storm will pass by morning. They huddled in the small space, the shelter now cramped but still functional. Elena shared her collected water, helping Kor to drink despite his unusual physiology. As the hours passed, the Mentirian's condition stabilized, his damaged eye stalks protected by the absorbent material. "Why did you help me?" Kor asked during a brief lull in the storm. "It decreases your survival probability." Elena considered the question. "Because survival isn't just about individual endurance. Sometimes it's about cooperation." "A non-logical parameter," Kor observed, though there was no judgment in his tone. "Not everything about survival is logical," Elena replied. "Sometimes instinct and compassion are just as important as calculation." The conversation faded as exhaustion took hold. They slept in shifts, one always awake to monitor the shelter's condition and make repairs when necessary. By dawn, the first storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by its violence. Elena carefully opened the entrance flap and surveyed the platform. The scene was one of devastation. The Vargan's boulder shelter had collapsed entirely, crushing one of them beneath its weight. The other Vargan was attempting to lift the stones, his protective coverall dissolved in patches to reveal burned skin beneath. The Qualls had survived by huddling together in their shallow indent, though all showed signs of acid damage to their feathers. The Zenorians had fared worst of all. One was missing entirely, while the other two lay motionless, their translucent bodies clouded with injury. Only Kor and Elena had survived the night without significant injury, though Kor's shelter was now a flattened ruin of twisted fibers. "The second storm will arrive in approximately 12 hours, Kor stated, his damaged eye stalks twitching. "The meteorological pattern suggests it will be 27% more severe than the first." Elena nodded, already assessing the damage to her shelter. The outer stone layer had held, but some of the binding fibers had weakened. It would need reinforcement before the next storm. "We should strengthen the structure," she said, "and perhaps expand it slightly." Kor's remaining functional eye stalks swiveled toward her. "We? If you're willing to help," Elena replied. "Two sets of hands will work faster than one." The Mentirian considered this, his analytical mind clearly calculating the odds. Yes, he finally agreed. Cooperation increases survival probability in this scenario. They set to work immediately, gathering fresh materials to reinforce the shelter. With Kor's help, Elena was able to improve the drainage system and add a second layer of stone to the exterior. The Mentirian's understanding of fluid dynamics proved invaluable, his suggestions resulting in a more efficient water channeling system around the base. As they worked, the surviving Vargan approached, his massive frame stooped with exhaustion and injury. "Human," he growled, though the aggression had drained from his voice. "Your shelter survived." Elena continued working, not looking up. "It did." "Mine did not. Tal is dead." Now Elena paused, meeting the Vargan's gaze. "I'm sorry for your loss." The Vargan's eyes narrowed, but there was a new respect in his expression. "You offered knowledge freely before. I refused out of pride. Now I ask, will you teach me how to build as you have built?" Elena glanced at Kor, who had paused in his work, eye stalks alert and focused on the interaction. This was unexpected, a Vargan asking for human instruction. "I'll show you the basics," Elena agreed after a moment. "But we don't have much time before the next storm." "I am Vel," the Vargan said, bowing his head slightly. "I learn quickly." And so he did. Despite his massive hands, better suited for crushing than crafting, Vel proved to be an attentive student. Elena showed him how to select the strongest fibers, how to bind them effectively, and how to layer the materials for maximum protection. By midday, Vel had constructed a basic shelter near Elena's, incorporating the principles she had demonstrated. Word spread among the surviving cadets. The Qualls sent a representative, a female with less damaged feathers than the others, to observe Elena's techniques. Even the surviving Xenorians, recovered enough to move, but still weakened, approached to study the drainage system Core had designed. Elena found herself at the center of an impromptu survival class, demonstrating techniques her grandfather had taught her years ago, skills considered obsolete in an age of advanced technology. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here, surrounded by representatives of species far more technologically advanced than humans, she was the teacher of primitive knowledge that was now essential for survival. As the hours passed, a small community formed on the platform. Shelters of varying quality took shape, all based on Elena's triangular design or Core's improved dome structure. The Qualls, with their dexterous clawed hands, proved especially adept at binding the fibrous materials, creating tight seals that would resist the wind. The Xenorians, once they abandoned their disdain for physical labor, discovered that their ability to perceive minute color variations helped identify the strongest plant fibers. Even Vel, the surviving Vargan, contributed his immense strength, moving the heaviest stones into position for those too weak to lift them. The platform, which had been a scene of desperate individual struggle just hours before, now hummed with cooperative effort. As the second storm approached, Elena surveyed the transformation with quiet satisfaction. 7 shelters now stood where before there had been only her own and Core's. None were as refined as her original design, but all incorporated the basic principles that would give their occupants a fighting chance. "You have catalyzed a significant behavioral shift," Core observed, his damaged eye stalks now wrapped in protective layers of the spongy material. "Cooperation has replaced competition." "Necessity," Elena replied with a slight smile. "The greatest teacher of all." The drone, which had observed silently throughout the assessment, now hovered closer. "Cadet Reyes," it intoned. "Your actions are noted. Assisting others was not a parameter of the assessment." Elena met the drone's camera eye steadily. "The assessment is to survive the storm cycle on Virex 11. These are the methods I'm using to accomplish that goal." The drone's processors whirred as it processed her response. Cooperation was not prohibited, it finally acknowledged. The assessment continues. As the drone retreated, Vel approached, his massive frame casting a shadow over Elena and Core. "The machine disapproves of sharing knowledge," he rumbled. "On my world, we would have competed until all but one had perished. It is our way." "And how has that way served your people?" Elena asked quietly. Vel was silent for a long moment. "We advance slowly," he admitted. "Each generation must rediscover what the previous knew, but would not share." "A significant inefficiency," Core commented, eye stalks twitching. "Yes," Vel agreed, surprising them both. "Perhaps there are better ways." The first hints of the second storm appeared on the horizon, dark clouds swirling with ominous energy, flashes of lightning illuminating their depths. The wind began to rise, carrying the promise of more acid rain and stronger gusts than before. "To your shelters," Elena called out to the gathered cadets. "Secure your entrances and remember the reinforcement techniques." The group dispersed, each cadet crawling into their respective structure. Elena and Core returned to their reinforced shelter, now slightly larger but still snug for the two of them. They sealed the entrance just as the first heavy drops began to fall. The second storm hit with even greater fury than the first. Wind shrieked across the platform, testing every binding and seal. Rain lashed horizontally, seeking any weakness in the shelter's outer layers. Through it all, Elena and Core monitored their structure, making minor adjustments when necessary, bracing against the wind's strongest gusts. Through gaps in the shelter, they could see the other structures swaying but holding firm. The improvements had worked, triangular frames distributing the wind pressure, overlapping stone layers deflecting the acid rain, drainage channels preventing erosion at the bases. Hours passed. The storm intensified, then gradually began to wane. By dawn of the second day, it had passed entirely, leaving behind a platform glistening with moisture, but largely intact. One by one, the cadets emerged from their shelters, blinking in the pale sunlight that now broke through the thinning cloud cover. Remarkably, all had survived the night. The qual's feathers were bedraggled but mostly intact. The Xenorians' translucent bodies showed signs of healing rather than further injury. Vel emerged from his shelter with a triumphant roar, pounding his chest in celebration. Elena and Kor were the last to exit their shelter, surveying the scene with quiet satisfaction. Their combined design had not only survived, but had served as the model for the others' salvation. "Assessment complete," announced the drone, hovering above the platform. "Analyzing results." The cadets gathered in the center of the platform, exhausted but alive. Elena found herself at the center of the group, receiving nods of respect from species that had dismissed her just 2 days earlier. "Cadet Elena Reyes," the drone intoned. "Step forward." Elena complied, standing tall despite her fatigue. "Your performance metrics indicate exceptional adaptability and resource utilization. However, you violated the implicit parameter of individual assessment by sharing knowledge and resources." A murmur ran through the group. Elena maintained her composure, waiting. "Upon further analysis," the drone continued, "this violation reveals the true purpose of the Virex 11 assessment. The Intergalactic Academy values not only survival skills, but leadership potential. By choosing cooperation over competition, you demonstrated the highest form of leadership, elevating those around you rather than securing only your own success." The drone's camera eye swiveled to include the entire group in its field of vision. "All cadets who survived have passed the assessment. Those who learned to adapt, to cooperate, and to overcome technological dependence will advance to the next phase of training. The assessment is concluded." A cheer erupted from the group, tensions finally releasing in a wave of relief and triumph. Elena found herself surrounded by alien cadets, receiving the equivalent of handshakes, backslaps, and bows from a diverse array of species. Kor approached last, his damaged eye stalks now beginning to show signs of regeneration. "Your methods were effective, Elena Reyes," he said, his voice now translating clearly through his repaired device. "I have calculated that my survival probability would have been 12.7% without your intervention. And mine might have been lower without your improvements to the drainage system," Elena replied with a smile. "Sometimes, the best solutions come from combining different perspectives. A principle I will apply in future scenarios," Kor agreed. "Perhaps there is value in your human instinct for cooperation after all." As the cadets prepared to depart Virex 11, Elena took one last look at the landscape beyond the platform. The acid rain had resumed its constant patter, washing away the last traces of their shelters. Nothing permanent remained of their struggle for survival. No technology, no advanced materials, no lasting monuments to their achievement. Yet, something had changed. The aliens looked at her differently now, with respect rather than condescension. More importantly, they looked at each other differently, seeing potential allies where before they had seen only competitors. Elena smiled as she boarded the transport vessel. Her grandfather would have been proud. In a test designed to strip away technology and force a return to basics, she had rediscovered humanity's greatest survival tool of all, the ability to share knowledge, to cooperate despite differences, and to recognize that sometimes the oldest solutions were still the best. As Virex 11 receded behind them, Elena knew that this lesson, this most basic principle of survival, would travel with them to the stars, a human gift to the wider galaxy that no amount of technological advancement could improve upon.